Good evening, seeker of forgotten truths. Tonight, beneath the veil of stars and stillness, I shall reveal to you a secret that has slumbered in shadow for decades, a tale not of simple heroism, but of ancient law, deliberate sacrifice, and a magic so old that even the Ministry of Magic knows not its proper name. You have heard, perhaps, the common account that a mother's love saved her child. But love alone does not unmake dark lords. No. What Lily Potter invoked on that fateful Halloween night was far more intricate, far more deliberate, and infinitely older than the wand she never lifted. If you find value in these forgotten chronicles, I invite you to subscribe, so that more such secrets may find their way to your threshold. But, for now, let the weight of the day fall away. Close your eyes, if you wish. Let your breath deepen and slow. For this is a story to be felt in the marrow, to be absorbed as one absorbs the scent of old parchment and laurel smoke. Settle now into comfort and shadow. Our journey begins in a village where memory runs deeper than any living witch or wizard suspects, a village called Godric's Hollow. The autumn night descended upon Godric's Hollow with the slow inevitability of a held breath. The church belangent iron, cast in an age when wizards and common folk still shared their bread ovens and their burial grounds, told the hour of 8. Its deep bronze voice rolling across slate roofs and chimney smoke, across gardens gone to seed and lanes paved with stones so old they had been worn smooth by centuries of footfall. The sound lingered in the air long after the clapper fell silent, as if the village itself were reluctant to let go of the day, reluctant to surrender to whatever the darkness might carry with it. In the windows of the cottages, lamplight bloomed soft gold against the encroaching indigo of evening. Wood smoke curled from a dozen hearths, each thread of gray and white rising like a prayer into the cooling air. It was the hour when doors were bolted, when children were called in from twilight games, when the world contracted to the span of a single room, a single fire, the familiar faces gathered in its glow. There was comfort in this ritual, this nightly inward. There was safety. But the stones of Godric's Hollow were old, older than the church, older than the graveyard, where Peverells and Potters lay beneath lichened markers. These stones had been quarried from deeper earth, laid by hands that knew a magic that required no wand, no incantation learned from books. They had been placed with intention, aligned to thresholds and lintels, doorways and hearthstones, and they remembered. Oh, they remembered. For there is a current of magic that flows beneath the more common spellwork of the modern age of magic, written not in the tidy script of ministry legislation, but in the unspoken agreements between guest and host, between home and intruder, between grace offered and grace refused. It is the law of the hearth, the law of the threshold. And on this particular night, as the last light bled from the western sky and the first stars pricked through the vault of heaven, that law was stirring from its long, quiet slumber. The villagers did not feel it. They went about their evening routines, oblivious, as mortals so often are, to the subtle architecture of consequence being assembled in the unseen dimensions that press against our own. But the stones felt it. The old wood of doorframes and lintels felt it. The hearthstones, blackened by generations of fire, hummed with a low, expectant resonance that no ear could detect, but that thrummed nonetheless through the marrow of the world. A threshold, you see, is not merely a line drawn between inside and outside, between shelter and storm. A threshold is a judge. It recognizes names. It weighs purposes. It knows the difference between a guest who arrives with open hands and a shadow that slips across the doorstep with murder coiled in its intent. And when a threshold is crossed with neither courtesy nor honesty, when a home is violated by one who will not speak his name or his purpose, who refuses the ancient hospitality of acknowledgement, the threshold remembers. It marks the trespass with a tally invisible to mortal sight, a tally that waits, patient as stone, for the reckoning. Tonight, in a cottage at the end of a quiet lane, a reckoning was being prepared. The players did not yet know their roles, save one a young mother with red hair and a mind sharp as winter wind, who had read in an old family folio what others had dismissed as myth. She knew, and knowing, she had made her choice. The wind shifted, carrying with it the scent of decaying leaves and distant rain. Somewhere, in the darkness beyond the village, something was moving, something that had forgotten the old courtesies, or perhaps had never learned them, or perhaps most dangerously of all, had learned them and chosen to despise them. Who? The wind seemed to whisper through the eaves and around the chimneys. Who will call upon these laws tonight? And who, in their arrogance, will break them? In the Potter cottage, the fire on the hearth burned low, its light painting long, restless shadows across the walls. James Potter stood before an old casket of dark, polished wood, his hands resting on its carved lid. The casket was not large, no bigger than the span of a man's arms, but it possessed a weight that seemed to have little to do with the physical substance of oak and iron hinges. It was a weight of years, of lineage, of secrets passed down through generations with the solemnity of sacred trust. Lily stood beside him, her son drowsing against her shoulder, his small fist curled in the fabric of her robes. Her green eyes, bright even in the dim firelight, were fixed on the casket with an intensity that spoke of both dread and determination. They had spoken of this moment in whispers, late at night, when even the walls seemed to have ears. They had debated, questioned, hesitated, but the gnawing certainty in Lily's chest, the knowledge that secrecy alone might not be enough, that Peter's trembling loyalty was a cracked vessel, barely holding water, had brought them at last to this threshold. James opened the casket. Within, nestled in folds of aged-oftened velvet, lay the heirlooms of his line, a cloak clasp bearing the Potter crest, a wand no longer usable but preserved for memory's sake, a set of small crystal phials containing ... something, but it was the folio that Lily reached for, a sheaf of vellum bound in dark leather, its pages covered in a spidery, elegant hand that predated modern orthography. The folio had come to the Potter line through marriage, a bequest from Iolanthe Peverell, who had joined her blood to James's ancestors centuries before. Lily carried the folio to the table and spread it open with the reverence one might afford a holy text. The pages crackled softly, exhaling the scent of lavender and something sharper, more resinous laurel perhaps, or myrrh. James lit 2 more candles, their flames steady and bright, and leaned over her shoulder as she turned the brittle leaves. Here, Lily breathed, her finger tracing a passage written in faded iron-gall ink, Votum Custodiae, the Vow of Protection. James read silently, his lips moving slightly as he parsed the archaic phrasing. What he read made the hairs on the back of his neck rise. This was not a spell in the manner to which they had been trained at Hogwarts, no wand movement, no clearly articulated incantation to be practiced until muscle and word aligned. This was something else entirely, a binding, a covenant, a summoning of forces that existed in the structure of the world itself, in the way a home could be made sacred, in the way blood could speak across the membrane between life and death. A sacrificial ward, James said slowly, his voice heavy with the implications. It requires ... double quotes, a willing death, Lily finished, her tone steady, though her hand trembled slightly as it rested on the page. A parent's freely chosen sacrifice. It must be deliberate, James. Not a martyrdom stumbled into by accident or circumstance, but a conscious act of exchange, my life for his. She glanced down at Harry, whose head was tucked beneath her chin, his breathing deep, and even in the trust of innocent sleep, something fierce and luminous kindled in her gaze, something that was neither soft nor sentimental, but hard as diamond and just as unyielding. James swallowed. Lily, if it comes to that, I will be ready, she said quietly. This is not folklore, James. Look at the components. Laurel ash from a tree rooted in home soil, a blood prick to seal consent, and the mandala carved or traced around the one to be protected. These are not symbols. They are triggers, anchors. The ward sleeps until the moment it is needed, and then, if the conditions are met, ... She turned the page, and there, rendered in faded ink and precise geometric lines, was the diagram, a circle within a circle, interlaced with sigils that predated the standardized runic alphabet taught in modern classrooms. At the center, a cradle. At the cardinal points, small marks indicating where the ash must be placed, where the blood must fall, where the words of the vow must be spoken. James read the conditions aloud, his voice barely more than a whisper, as though speaking too loudly might wake some sleeping power prematurely. First, the one who would do harm must stand within the hearth's inner ring, within the home itself, not beyond the threshold. Second, grace must be offered 3 times and refused 3 times, so that the heart of the intruder is made plain, and the law may judge his intent. Third, the death must be the parent's free choice, undertaken with full knowledge and consent, so that the protection is woven from will as much as from blood. He looked up, meeting Lily's eyes, and if all 3 conditions are met, then the law inverts the harm, Lily said softly. The mortal blow falls, not upon the child, but upon the one who refused grace. His own spell, his own intent, becomes the instrument of his unmaking. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The fire crackled. Somewhere in the night, outside, an owl called, its voice plaintive and distant. The weight of what they were considering pressed down upon them like the weight of centuries, like the weight of all the mothers and fathers who had stood at this same crossroads and made this same terrible choice. It's perilous, James said at last. If the conditions aren't met precisely, if something goes wrong, then we will have tried, Lily interrupted gently. And we will still have the Fidelius, 2 shields, James, one of secrecy, one of blood, one woven by Dumbledore's wisdom, one by our family's legacy. Surely that will be enough. James pulled her close, careful not to disturb the sleeping child between them. His heart hammered against his ribs, and he wondered if this was how soldiers felt on the eve of battle, this strange mixture of terror and resolve, of love so fierce it became indistinguishable from rage. Then we do it, he said into her hair. We weave the ward. The following evening, as rain began to patter against the windows in cold, irregular rhythms, Albus Dumbledore arrived at the Potter cottage. He came alone, his tall figure bent slightly against the wind, his cloak heavy with moisture. The wards recognized him and parted like a curtain. The door opened before he could knock, and James ushered him inside with a glance over his shoulder at the dark, dripping lane beyond. They sat by the fire, James, Lily, and the headmaster, while Harry played quietly on a rug nearby, stacking wooden blocks with the solemn concentration unique to very small children. The warmth of the room could not entirely banish the chill that had followed Dumbledore inside. A chill that had nothing to do with the weather and everything to do with the shadow of prophecy that hung over them all. "The situation is graver than I had hoped," Dumbledore began, without preamble, his voice low and weary. "Voldemort is moving. His attention has narrowed, focused. The prophecy." He paused, removing his spectacles to polish them, though Lily suspected it was more to give his hands something to do than from any real need. "The prophecy has reached his ears, though not in its entirety. He knows that a child born at the end of July, to parents who have thrice defied him, is destined to be his equal and his potential downfall. He will not rest until he has eliminated that threat." Lily's hand tightened on the arm of her chair. "And you believe that child is Harry?" "I believe Voldemort believes it is Harry," Dumbledore replied, settling the spectacles back onto his nose, which, in practical terms, amounts to the same danger. "We must act, and act swiftly. I propose the Fidelius charm." James leaned forward. "We've discussed it. It's a profound magic to entrust our safety entirely to a single secret keeper. It is the most powerful protection available to us," Dumbledore said gently. "When cast correctly, the Fidelius renders a location utterly invisible to all but those whom the secret keeper chooses to inform. Voldemort could stand on your doorstep and not perceive the house before him. He could press his hands against your walls and feel nothing but empty air. It is, in essence, a perfect concealment." Lily exchanged a glance with James. Beneath the table, her hand found his, and she squeezed once a signal they had agreed upon. "We proceed, then we will do it," James said. "We'll need a secret keeper we trust, absolutely." They discussed names, possibilities, contingencies. Dumbledore offered himself, but James demurred if the Dark Lord suspected Dumbledore was the keeper. The headmaster would become the primary target, and his loss would be catastrophic for the wider war effort. Sirius was proposed and tentatively accepted, though even as they spoke his name, Lily felt the faint, cold prickle of unease that she could not quite name. Throughout the discussion, Lily remained quieter than usual, her gaze drifting now and then to the doorway that led to the stairs, to the nursery above. She was thinking of the folio, still open on her writing desk upstairs. She was thinking of laurel ash and blood and concentric circles traced in chalk that could be hidden beneath a rug until the moment of need. "Lily," Dumbledore's voice recalled her to the present. "Do you have concerns?" She looked at him, this old wizard who had lived through so much, who carried the weight of so many secret sand. She made a choice, not to lie, but not to fully reveal. "Not yet, no," she said softly. "No concerns, only a hope that our preparations will be enough, that we've thought of everything we can." Dumbledore studied her for a moment, and she had the distinct impression that he saw more than she had said that he perceived the outline of some additional plan in the careful way she held herself, in the flicker of her gaze, toward the stairs. but he did not press. Perhaps he understood that parents, when cornered, will take measures that even the wisest counselors cannot always predict or sanction. "Then we will proceed," he said at last. "I will make the arrangements. The charm will be cast within the week." He rose, and they walked him to the door. As he stepped across the threshold back into the rain, he paused and looked back at them, this young couple, so bright and brave and terribly, terribly vulnerable. "Guard each other well," he said quietly, "and know that whatever comes, you do not face it alone." Then he was gone, disapparating with a soft crack that echoed in the sudden silence. Lily closed the door and leaned against it, her eyes shut. "James," she whispered, "we have to finish it tonight." He did not ask what she meant. He simply nodded, kissed her forehead, and went to check that the house was secure while she climbed the stairs to the nursery. Her heart steady, her resolve unshaken. "Tenets," she thought, "one of secrecy, woven by the greatest wizard of the age. One of blood, woven by a mother who had read the old laws and understood that love, when properly harnessed, is not a weakness but a weapon." 2 nets, and between them, surely, her son would be safe. The nursery was small and warmly lit, filled with the soft clutter of infancy. A rocking chair draped with a blanket, a changing table, shelves lined with cloth books and wooden animals, and in the center, beneath a mobile of tiny broomsticks that turned lazily in the air, stood the cradle. Lily set down the basket she had carried upstairs. Within it, a small cloth bag of ash laurel, burned in the garden that very afternoon and ground to fine powder, a silver needle, a piece of white chalk, and the open folio, its pages marked with strips of ribbon. She had sent James to settle Harry downstairs for a time, to give him his supper and keep him occupied. This work required concentration, precision, and a kind of meditative calm that was difficult to achieve with a curious toddler underfoot. She would call them up when the mandala was traced, when the last words were ready to be spoken. Kneeling on the floor beside the cradle, Lily took up the chalk and began to draw. The circle came first, single, unbroken line that enclosed the cradle and a small space around it, just large enough for a person to stand within. Her hand was steady, her line sure, though her heart beat hard in her chest. This was not theoretical magic, not an academic exercise debated in a library carol. This was real. This was dangerous. If she erred, if she miscalculated, the consequences could be catastrophic, but she did not err. She had studied the diagram until she could see it behind her closed eyelids, until the geometry of it was burned into her mind. The outer circle, the inner circle, offset slightly to the east. The sigils at the cardinal points, each one a rune older than the Futhark, each one a word in a language that had no spoken form, only shape and intention. When the mandala was complete, she sat back on her heels and studied it. In the gentle lamplight, the chalk lines seemed to glow faintly, as though some quality of the floorsome memory in the wood itself had recognized the pattern and was responding to it. Perhaps it was only her imagination. Perhaps not. Next, the ash. She rose and went to the lintel of the doorway, the threshold between the hall and the nursery. With the tip of her finger, she traced a thin line of laurel ash along the upper beam, murmuring as she did so, "By root and branch, by hearth and home, let this threshold know its own." The words were not from the folio. They were hers, a small improvisation that felt right, that felt necessary. Magic, true magic, was not only incantation and ingredient. It was intention and will, belief and relationship. She was not commanding the house. She was asking it to remember, to participate, to become a guardian. When the lintel was marked, she returned to the cradle and knelt once more within the inner circle. From her pocket she drew the silver needle. Her hands did not shake, not even now, not even at the prospect of what came next. The folio had been explicit. The blood must be freely given, a token of consent, of deliberate choice. It was this element, more than any other, that marked the difference between a ward that could be invoked by accident and one that required the full, conscious will of the caster. It was this that prevented the magic from becoming a trap for the unwary. Lily pricked the pad of her left index finger. A bead of red welled up, bright against her pale skin. She let it fall onto the floorboards at the exact center of the mandala, where the two circles overlapped, where the geometry suggested a point of maximum resonance. The blood soaked into the wood and vanished, as though the floor had drunk it. And then, in the stillness, she felt it, a subtle shift, a deepening, as though the room had drawn breath and held it. The ward was waking, not fully, not yet. It would not wake fully until the moment of activation, the moment when all three conditions were met. But it was there now, a potential coiled beneath the surface of the world, waiting. Lily placed her hands on the edge of the cradle and spoke the vow. Her voice was low and clear, each word enunciated with the precision of ritual. By blood and breath, by hearth and threshold, I bind my life to this child's protection. Let no harm pass this circle, save it pass through me. Let grace be offered, and let refusal be marked. And if death comes, let it come to me willingly, and let my willing death be shield and weapon both, turning the blow upon the one who strikes without mercy. She paused, drawing a deep breath, and then added the final phrase, the phrase that would activate the ward only if the three conditions were met. 3 times let grace be offered within this hearth. 3 times let it be refused. And upon the 3rd refusal, let the law of the threshold answer. The words hung in the air like a chord struck on an invisible harp, resonating in frequencies that could not quite be heard, but could be felt in the chest, in the bones. For a moment, Lily thought she saw the chalk lines brighten, thought she felt the floor hum beneath her knees. Then the sensation faded, and the nursery was simply a nursery, again quiet, warm, ordinary. But it was not ordinary, not anymore. Lily stood and carefully rolled the rug back over the mandala, concealing the chalk lines beneath soft wool. To any eye but hers, the room would appear unchanged, but she would know. She would feel it the moment anyone crossed that threshold with intent to harm. She would know, and she would be ready. She called down the stairs, and James brought Harry up, already drowsy and ready for bed. As she lifted her son into the cradle, as she kissed his forehead and tucked the blanket around his small form, she allowed herself one moment of ferocious, protective love, the kind that would burn down the world, if necessary, the kind that would stand between her child and death without hesitation. "Sleep, little one," she whispered. "You are safe. I have seen to it." And if a shadow of sorrow touched her smile, if she felt the cold foreknowledge of the price she had agreed to pay, she did not let it show. She was a Potter now, by marriage and by choice, but she was also a daughter of the old magic, of the forgotten laws, and she had done what those laws required. All that remained was to see whether the hunter would be. 3 days later, in a cramped and dingy room that smelled of mildew and fear, Peter Pettigrew sat across from a figure whose presence seemed to suck the warmth from the air. The figure did not raise his voice. He did not need to. His very stillness was a threat, his patience a promise of exquisite, inevitable retribution should Peter's answers prove unsatisfactory. The location, the Dark Lord said softly, his red eyes fixed on the trembling man before him. You will give it to me now. Peter's hands shook so badly he had to clasp them together to keep them still. Sweat beaded on his forehead, ran down his temples. He had thought he could do this, thought he could play both sides, thought he could survive by choosing the winning team. But now, faced with the cold reality of betrayal, with the weight of what he was about to do, he felt his insides twist with nausea and self-loathing. Double quotes. His voice cracked. He swallowed and tried again. I am the secret keeper for the Potters, James and Lily Potter. Their location is ... double quotes. And he spoke it. The secret unspooled from his lips like a thread pulled from a tapestry. And with each word, the Fidelius charm frayed and parted, revealing what it had been woven to conceal. He spoke the name of the village, the lane, the cottage. He described the gate, the garden, the door painted blue. When he finished, the silence in the room was absolute. Then Voldemort smiled a thin, cold expression that held no humor, only satisfaction. You have done well, Wormtail, he said, rising from his chair with a serpentine grace, and you will be rewarded. But first, I have an appointment to keep, a prophecy to disprove, a threat to eliminate. Peter said nothing. There was nothing to say. He had crossed a line from which there could be no return, had betrayed the people who had called him friend, had condemned a child to death for the sake of his own miserable survival. He would carry that weight for the rest of his days, however long or short they might be. Voldemort swept from the room, his cloak billowing behind him like smoke. Peter sat alone in the dim light, staring at his shaking hands, and wondered if there was any corner of the world dark enough to hide him from the enormity of what he had done. The Dark Lord moved through the night like a shadow given form, his wand a sliver of white wood in his long-fingered hand. The rain had stopped, leaving the roads slick and gleaming under a sliver of moon. He did not apparate directly to the village. There were wards, old wards, that might detect such an arrival, but rather to a hill some distance away, and from there he walked. He was not concerned. He was never concerned. Concern was for the weak, the uncertain, the ones who doubted their power. Voldemort did not doubt. He was the greatest sorcerer alive, the heir to Slytherin, the wizard who had pushed the boundaries of magic further than any before him. A child, a mere infant, was no threat to him, prophecy or no prophecy. He would snuff out this supposed danger as easily as one might blow out a candle, and then he would return to the larger work of reshaping the world in his image. As he descended the hill and entered the outskirts of Godric's Hollow, the Fidelius charm released its hold. Where a moment before there had been only an empty space between two other cottages, now there stood a third, small, tidy, with a blue door and lamplight glowing in the windows. The sight of it pleased him, so easy, so vulnerable. He crossed the lane, his footsteps silent on the wet stones. He reached the gate, pushed it open. The garden was dark, the path unlit. No wards flared, no alarms sounded. The Potters, it seemed, had placed all their faith in secrecy, and now that secrecy was undone. Voldemort reached the door. In another time, in another tale, a Dark Lord might have paused here, might have felt the weight of the threshold, the ancient expectation that those who cross into a home should announce themselves, should speak their name and purpose, should accept the hospitality or rejection of the hearth. But Voldemort had no patience for such archaic niceties. He was not a guest, he was a conqueror. He owed these people nothing, not courtesy, not honesty, not mercy. He raised his wand, whispered a spell, and the lock gave way with a soft click. He stepped across the threshold. No light flared, no ward resisted him. The house admitted him without protest, and he allowed himself a moment of contempt for the fools who had lived here, who had not layered their protections, who had relied on a single charm and a single traitor's loyalty. But the house remembered. Oh, the house remembered. The threshold had felt the step of a foot that did not ask permission. The lintel had heard no name spoken, no purpose declared. And in the bones of the old wood, in the stones beneath the floorboards, a tally was marked. One breach, one refusal of courtesy, one act of contempt toward the ancient laws. The forfeit had begun. James Potter was halfway across the sitting room when the door opened. He had been laughing a moment before. Lily had said something witty, something that had made him grin, even through his anxiety. And the laughter was still on his face when he saw the dark figure framed in the doorway, wand, raised red eyes gleaming. Lily, take Harry and go. Run. I'll hold him off. His own wand was on the sofa, an arm's length away, where he had set it down while he played with his son. An arm's length might as well have been a mile. He lunged for it, knowing even as he moved that he would not be fast enough. But lunging anyway because he was James Potter, and James Potter did not stand idle while his family was threatened. The green light filled the room. There was no pain. There was only a moment of weightless surprise, a sense of the world tilting, and then nothing at all. James crumpled to the floor, his hand outstretched, his fingers just brushing the hem of the sofa, his face still wearing the faint ghost of his interrupted smile. Upstairs, Lily heard the sound, or rather, the sudden, terrible absence of sound. The silence that rushed in to fill the space where James's voice, James's laughter, James's presence had been. She knew. She knew with the awful clarity of certainty what had happened. And she had perhaps 3 heartbeats, perhaps 5, before that silence would climb the stairs and find her. She ran into the nursery, slammed the door, and leaned against it for half a second, her breath coming fast, her mind racing. The mandala, the ward, the circle was traced, the vow was spoken, the ash was on the lintel. All that remained were the 3 refusals. She heard footsteps on the stairs, slow, deliberate. Lily scooped Harry from his cradle and held him close, then set him back down as gently as she could, forcing herself to be calm, to think clearly. The ward required her to stand between the killer and the child. It required the killer to be within the circle. It required the offers of grace, made in the proper form, and their refusal. She positioned herself at the foot of the cradle, facing the door, and with trembling hands she pulled back the rug to reveal the mandala beneath. The chalk lines gleamed faintly in the lamplight, and she felt the subtle thrumming that told her the ward was still there, still waiting. She rolled up the corner of the rug just enough, then let it fall loosely, so that the pattern was visible to her but might be overlooked by someone whose attention was fixed on other things. She drew a breath, steadied herself, and waited. The door opened. Voldemort stepped into the nursery, and in that moment, in that single step, the second breach was marked. He had entered the inner sanctum of the hearth, the heart of the home, the room where the child slept. And he had done so with murder in his intent and contempt in his heart. The threshold recognized him. The ward stirred, tightening its coils. His gaze swept the room and settled on Lily, then on the child behind her. The infant was sitting up in the cradle, staring at the intruder with wide, uncomprehending eyes. "Stand aside, girl," Voldemort said, his voice soft, almost bored. "Stand aside, and you need not die." This was not mercy. This was expedience. He had no quarrel with the mother. His quarrel was with the prophecy, with the child it named. If she moved, he would spare her. If she did not, well, one more corpse made little difference. But Lily did not move. She spread her arms slightly, as though she could shield her son with her body, and she spoke clearly, deliberately, using the words she had memorized from the folio. "Take me instead. Let the child live, and take me in his place." The first offer of grace. Voldemort's lip curled. "Foolish woman, I have no need of you. Step aside." "No," Lily said, her voice unwavering. "Spare him. I offer my life for his. Take me and let him go." The second offer. For a moment, something flickered in the Dark Lord's expression. Not pity, never pity, but perhaps a faint irritation, or a distant curiosity at the stubbornness of maternal attachment. But he had not come here to negotiate. He had come to kill. "This is your last chance," he said coldly. "Step aside, or die with him." Lily met his gaze, and in her green eyes there was no fear, only a fierce, luminous certainty. She had read the laws, she had drawn the circle, she had pricked her finger and spoken the vow, and now, here, at the end, she would fulfill the final condition. "Take me," she said, a third time, her voice ringing with finality. "Spare my son, and take me." The third offer of grace, the third refusal to step aside, the third and final breach. The mandala beneath her feet blazed to life not with light, but with a soundless resonance that shivered through the floor, through the walls, through the very air. The ward recognized that all conditions were met. The killer stood within the inner circle. He had refused grace 3 times within the hearth, and the death about to occur was offered, willingly by the mother who had bound her life to her child's protection. The law of the threshold awakened. Voldemort did not see it. He saw only an obstinate, annoying obstacle. He raised his wand, spoke the words with the casual efficiency of long practice, Avada Kedavra, and the green light leaped forth. Lily Potter died. Her body crumpled, her arms flung wide, her red hair spilling across the floor like a banner. She died, as she had intended to, freely, willingly, in full knowledge and acceptance of the cost. And the mandala drank the curse. It took the green light into its geometry, into the woven lattice of blood and ash and chalk and intention, and it spun it, refracted it, inverted it, according to the law that Iolanthe Peverell had written centuries before. Asterisk refusal of grace within the hearth shall bind the forfeit upon the one who refuses. Asterisk, for a fraction of a heartbeat, Voldemort felt nothing, and then he felt everything. The curse rebounded. It tore back along the path it had traveled, but it carried with it the weight of the forfeit, the triple breach of threshold law, the thrice refused grace, the arrogant contempt for the oldest statutes of hospitality and home. It struck not as a simple killing curse, which might destroy a body, but as a curse weighted with judgment, with consequence, with the turning of a Albus Dumbledore arrived less than an hour later, drawn by the catastrophic surge of magic that had rippled through the wards of the village like a stone dropped into still water. He apparated to the lane and stood for a moment, staring at the ruined cottage, his face pale, his hands clenched on his wand. He had hoped, he had planned, he had woven his own protections, but he had not expected this totality of destruction. this eerie silence broken only by the distant wail of a child. He crossed the threshold carefully, stepping over the shattered door, and found James first, lying in the sitting room. Dumbledore knelt beside him, touched his neck, confirmed what he already knew, and closed the young man's eyes with a gentle hand. Grief was a stone in his chest, cold and heavy, but he could not afford to give in to it. Not yet. He climbed the stairs, his heart hammering, and entered the nursery. The scene before him was chaos: shattered glass, scorched floorboards, a cradle tipped on its side with a crying child clinging to the bars. And on the floor, Lily, her body positioned as though she had thrown herself between the door and the cradle, her face peaceful in death. But it was the floor itself that held Dumbledore's attention. He knelt and brushed aside the remnants of a rug, revealing the mandala beneath chalk lines still faintly visible, though smudged and blasted by the rebound of the curse. He traced one of the sigils with his finger, recognizing it from his own obscure studies, from texts so old they predated Hogwarts, from the fragmentary lore of hearth magic and threshold law. "Oh, Lily," he whispered, "you knew. You read the old laws, and you invoked them." He looked around the room, reading the evidence like a language: the ash on the lintel, the positioning of the body, the fact that Voldemort 4, there could be no doubt who had come here, had been standing within the circle when the curse rebounded. Dumbledore understood, then, what had happened. Not all of it, not every nuance, but enough. Lily had not relied on love alone. She had harnessed love, yes, but she had channeled it through a framework of law, of ancient statute, of the kind of magic that required not only power, but precision, not only sacrifice, but consent. She had offered grace 3 times, he suspected. For that was the way of the old covenants. Fanned Voldemort in his arrogance, had refused. Refused to speak his name at the threshold. Refused to acknowledge the hospitality of the hearth. Refused the offered exchange. And the hearth had answered. Dumbledore stood slowly, his knees aching, and went to the cradle. He lifted Harry gently, cradling the weeping child against his chest, and examined the mark on his forehead. The scar was already closing, already hardening into a shape that would never fully fade, a permanent reminder of the night a mother's deliberate sacrifice and a forgotten law had turned a killing curse back upon its caster. "You lived, Harry," Dumbledore murmured, rocking the child gently. "You lived because your mother understood something that the Dark Lord, in all his power, did not. She understood that magic is not only force, it is also covenant. And covenants, once invoked, do not break for anyone, not even for the greatest dark wizard of the age." He looked once more at Lily, and he felt the full weight of his grief settle over him. She had been brilliant, she had been brave, and she had paid the price she knew the magic would demand, paid it willingly, so that her son might live. "I will see him safe," Dumbledore promised softly. "I will honor what you have done." And then, gathering the child close, he turned and descended the stairs, leaving the cottage of ruin and sorrow behind, carrying with him the boy who had become, in a single night, both an orphan and a legend. The Fidelius had concealed the location, but it could not conceal the explosion of magic, the pillar of light that had briefly lit the night sky. By dawn, the first members of the Order would arrive. By midday, the Ministry would seal the site. But Dumbledore did not wait for any of them. He had one more task to complete, one final piece of Lily's plan to set in motion. He apparated to a quiet suburban street in Little Whinging, Surrey, and walked slowly down the pavement until he reached number 4, Privet Drive. It was nearly morning. The sky was lightening in the east, and the first birds were beginning to sing. The houses were dark, their occupants still asleep. Dumbledore stood at the gate for a long moment, looking down at the child in his arms. Harry had cried himself to exhaustion, and now slept fitfully, his small face streaked with tears, his hand curled against Dumbledore's robes. "This is not the home I would have chosen for you," Dumbledore said quietly. "But it is the home your mother chose, and her choice was not made lightly. Here, in this place, her protection can live on. Here, where her blood runs in your aunt's veins, the sacrificial ward can be extended, anchored, renewed." He had studied the theory, though he had never before seen it invoked. A sacrificial ward, once triggered, could be extended through close kinship if certain conditions were met. The child must share a roof with a blood relative, must be able to call that place home, and must return to it willingly until the age of majority. It was not a comfortable magic, not a kind one, but it was powerful enough to ensure that no remnant of Voldemort, no follower, no vengeful spirit could reach the boy so long as the protection held. Dumbledore approached the door and, with a wave of his wand, set Harry gently on the doorstep, wrapped in a blanket. Beside him, he placed a letter and explanation, brief and carefully worded, that he hoped would convey the gravity of what had happened and the necessity of the boy's presence here. Then, with his wand, he began the extension charm. It was delicate work, weaving the threads of the original sacrificial wards, still clinging to Harry's blood, still resonant with Lily's deliberate death, to the structure of this new threshold, this new hearth. He murmured the incantations in a language older than Latin, older than Greek, a language that was half words and half intention, and he felt the magic settle, felt it recognize the blood tie between Harry and the woman who slept upstairs, felt it anchor and take root. "It is done," he said at last, stepping back. "You are protected, Harry, until you come of age. Protected by your mother's sacrifice, by your aunt's blood, and by the ancient law of hearth and home. It is not the life I would wish for you, but it is the life that will keep you safe until you are strong enough to face what lies ahead." He took one last look at the sleeping child, then turned and walked away into the fading night. Behind him, the house stood silent, its threshold now marked with an invisible sigil, a ward that would hold for 17 years, or until the boy ceased to call this place home. The protection was in place, the law was satisfied, and Lily Potter's final gift to her son, a gift woven from blood and sacrifice, and an arrogance refused would endure. The sun had not yet risen when Severus Snape arrived at the ruins of the cottage in Godric's Hollow. He came not through the front door, but through a shattered window, his cloak billowing as he landed in a crouch amid the wreckage of the sitting room. His face was pale, his eyes wild, his breathing harsh and uneven. He had heard the news, third hand, passed in whispers through the Death Eater ranks. The Dark Lord had gone to kill the Potter child and had not returned. There had been an explosion. The cottage was destroyed, and Lily, Severus, could not finish the thought. He did not dare. He stumbled through the sitting room, barely seeing James's body where it lay beneath a ministry sheet. He took the stairs 2 at a time, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might crack his ribs. The nursery door was ajar. He pushed it open. The room was empty, save for the wreckage. The cradle was overturned, the window blown out, the floor scorched and scarred. And there, near the foot of the cradle, a dark stain on the floorboards that could only be blood. Severus fell to his knees. For a long time, he did not move. He simply knelt there, staring at the stain, at the faint chalk lines, still visible, despite the violence that had torn through the room. He recognized some of the sigils. He had seen them in texts he had studied in his youth in the restricted section of the Hogwarts library. In the private collection of a professor who had died before Severus could ask the right questions. This was not an ordinary ward. This was something ancient, something deliberate. Lily had not been taken by surprise. She had prepared. She had known what was coming, and she had woven a trap from her own life. "You did this," Severus whispered, his voice breaking. "You knew. You planned it. You stood there and offered yourself because you knew it would save him." He traced one of the chalk lines with a trembling finger, and he felt, faintly, the residue of the magic that had been invoked. Here the sacrificial vow, the Hearth law, the thrice-afford grace. He understood, then, or thought he did, how Lily had turned the Dark Lord's own curse against him. She had made her death a weapon. She had transformed her love into a statute, her sacrifice into a judgment, and Voldemort, in his arrogance, had walked into the trap and sprung it. Severus closed his eyes, and for a moment the grief was so overwhelming that he thought it would crush him. But beneath the grief was something else, something harder, colder, a resolve, a purpose. He stood, wiped his face with the back of his hand, and disapparated. When he appeared in Dumbledore's office an hour later, the headmaster was sitting at his desk, his face drawn, his hands folded before him. He looked up as Severus entered, and for a moment neither of them spoke. "I know what she did," Severus said hoarsely. "I saw the mandala, the chalk, the ash. I know she invoked the old laws." Dumbledore inclined his head slowly. "Yes. Can it be repeated? If another child is threatened? If no," Dumbledore said gently but firmly, "the ward is unrepeatable, Severus. It requires true, uncoerced love, freely given, without expectation of return, without ulterior motive. It requires a willingness to die that must be genuine, not performed. And it requires the precise alignment of conditions that may never occur again. To attempt it without the heart of it, the law would turn upon the maker." Severus stood very still. Then it was unique. What she did, yes, Dumbledore said quietly. It was unique, and it was extraordinary. Severus swallowed. The boy. Where is he? Safe. Protected by the very magic his mother invoked. I have extended the ward through his aunt's blood. He will live with her until he comes of age. I want... ... double quotes. Severus paused, his jaw working. I want to protect him. I owe her that much. Dumbledore studied him for a long moment, and then he nodded. Then you will keep this secret, Severus. You will guard the truth of what Lily did, and you will help me guard her son. Do you swear it?" "I swear it," Severus said, his voice raw. "On her memory, I swear it." And so the secret was sealed. The truth of the sacrificial ward, of the thrice-afford grace, and the arrogant refusal, of the mandala drawn in chalk and blood and love it, would be known to only a handful of people. And they would guard it as fiercely as they guarded the boy who had survived. For some truths, some magics, are too precious, too dangerous, to be spoken aloud in a world that does not yet understand the laws that underpin it. Centuries before the night that Voldemort fell, in an age when the name Peverell still carried weight and fear and reverence, a witch named Iolanthe sat in a tower room and bent over a sheaf of vellum, her quill scratching steadily in the candlelight. She was old, not ancient, but past the bloom of youth. with silver threading through her dark hair and lines etched around her eyes from years of study. The tower was hers, part of a modest estate inherited from her father, and she had turned it into a library, a laboratory, a sanctuary for the kind of magic that had no place in the public eye. Iolanthe Peverell was a scholar. More than that, she was a codifier, who took the sprawling, chaotic tangle of folk magic hedgecraft and whispered tradition and distilled it into something legible, something teachable. She had studied the old laws of hospitality, the way thresholds acted as both barrier and judge, the manner in which blood and consent could weave protection where steel and spell could not, and she had seen, in her lifetime, too many children killed in the petty wars of wizards who cared nothing for the sanctity of home or hearth. So she wrote of the law of the threshold, how a home could be made to recognize its guests, how refusal of basic courtesy, the giving of a name, the stating of a cuscode. She wrote of the law of the hearth, how an offer of grace, made 3 times within the bounds of the home, could bind the one who refused, turning his own intent back upon him. She wrote of the law of sacrifice, how a parent's willing death, offered in full knowledge and consent, could become a shield that no dark magic could pierce. And she bound these 3 laws together into a single ritual, a single ward, which she called Votum Custodiae, the vow of protection. It must be done with love, she wrote in careful script. Not sentiment, but the kind of love that is a decision, a choice, an act of will. Love that does not flinch from the arithmetic of cost. Love that stands at the threshold and says, no further. You will not pass unless you pass through me. She described the components. Laurel ash for laurel was the tree of home and victory, to seal the consent of the one who cast the ward. And a mandala traced around the one to be protected, a geometric expression of the law's architecture. And she described the conditions, so precise and so inflexible that no one could invoke the ward by accident. The would-be killer must stand within the hearth's inner ring. Grace must be offered thrice and refused thrice. The death must be the parent's free choice. 3 gates, its petals formed from geometric lines, stamped in laurel ash. 3 gates, and the arrogant will open all 3 without knowing. And when they do, the law will answer. She finished the codex and sealed it with a charm that would keep the pages intact for centuries. Then she placed it in a casket, along with other heirlooms, a cloak, a ring, a wandband, entrusted it to her children with strict instructions. Asterisk, this is to be passed down the line. Guard it, study it, and if ever the time comes when it is needed, do not hesitate. Iolanthe Peverell died in her bed, surrounded by her family, having done what so few ever do. She had taken the raw, dangerous beauty of the old magic and shaped it into something that could protect the innocent. She had written a law that even the darkest wizards would have to obey, whether they knew it or not. And centuries later, a young woman with red hair and green eyes would open that casket, read that codex, and use what Iolanthe had written to save her son. In a music box, hidden beneath a charred slat of floorboard, Albus Dumbledore found the letter 3 days after the fall of Voldemort. He had returned to the cottage alone, seeking closure, seeking answers, and the faint pulse of Magica preservation charm, still active despite the destruction, had drawn him to the small, soot-streaked box. Inside, folded in Lily's neat handwriting, was a single sheet of parchment. Dumbledore unfolded it with care and read, *Albus, Asterisk, asterisk, if you are reading this, then the worst has come, and I am gone. Do not grieve over long I made my choice with open eyes and a steady heart. Asterisk, asterisk, I have invoked the Votum Custodiae, the sacrificial ward passed down through the Peverell line. You will find the details in the folio James's family kept, but I will summarize here in case the folio is lost in the chaos. Asterisk, asterisk. I traced a mandala around Harry's cradle, using the pattern from Iolantha's codex. I marked the lintel with laurel ash. I pricked my finger and sealed my consent with blood. I spoke the vow, binding my life to his protection. Asterisk. Asterisk, the ward will activate only if 3 conditions are met. Asterisk, asterisk. 1. The killer must stand within the inner circle of the hearth. Asterisk. Asterisk 2. Grace must be offered 3 times and refused 3 times, so the law may judge his heart. Asterisk, asterisk 3. My death must be my free choice and exchange offered, not a murder suffered. Asterisk, asterisk, if all 3 occur, the law of the threshold will invert the killing blow upon the one who strikes, not because of sentiment, but because the old magic recognizes refusal of grace within a home as a breach of the deepest statutes. Asterisk, asterisk, I have done this knowingly. I have done this willingly. And I have done this in the hope that my sacrifice will be more than grief, that it will be a weapon, a shield, a binding that holds, even when I am gone. Asterisk, please, Albus. If the ward holds, extend it through my sister's blood. Petunia and I have not been close, but we are kin, and the protection can live on in her home if you anchor it there. Keep Harry safe until he is old enough to stand on his own. Asterisk, asterisk, do not let my death be wasted. Do not let him forget that he was loved. Asterisk, asterisk, always. Asterisk, asterisk, Lily, asterisk. Dumbledore read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and tucked it into his robes. His eyes were bright with unshed tears, his throat tight with a grief he could not yet fully acknowledge. But beneath the grief was a fierce, steady pride. Lily had understood. She had seen what so many failed to see, that magic at its deepest level was not about power, but about relationship, about the bonds between people, the contracts between selves and the world, the ancient covenants that governed not only spells, but souls. You were right, Lily, he said softly, to the empty room. Love is not enough on its own, but love given form, love made law, love that stands at the threshold and demands an accounting that is invincible. He rose, placed the music box gently on a shelf where it would be found by those who would care for the cottage's remnants, and left. He had work to do, a boy to watch over, a prophecy to steward, and a secret to keep until the time came when it could be safely told. The years passed, Godric's hollow healed. The cottage was rebuilt, not as a shrine, but as a home again, though it was whispered that on certain nights, if you stood very still, you could feel a warmth emanating from the threshold, as though the house itself remembered what had been done within its walls and approved. Children grew up hearing the story of the boy who lived, how a baby had survived the killing curse, how a dark lord had been vanquished by a love so powerful it defied death. The story became legend, legend became lullaby, and the lullaby drifted through the village on soft summer evenings, sung to children who would never know the full truth of what had happened. But the truth was there, inscribed in the bones of the house, in the memory of the threshold, in the faint scent of laurel that sometimes drifted through the nursery when the wind blew just right. Lily Potter had not simply loved her son. She had armored him with an ancient law. She had turned her sacrifice into a weapon. She had stood at the crossroads of the old magic and the new and chosen, with clarity and courage, to invoke the statute that even the greatest dark wizard could not escape. And Voldemort's biggest mistake, the error that had shattered his body and cast his soul adrift, had been simple, devastating arrogance. He had stepped onto the hearthstone of a home that was awake and watching. He had refused to speak his name or his purpose. He had refused 3 times the grace offered by a mother who knew the old laws. And in doing so, he had bound himself under a forfeit older than wandlore, older than ministry, older than any power he had ever wielded. He had been judged by the threshold, and the threshold had answered. And so, dear listener, we come to the end of our tale not of luck or chance, but of knowledge, preparation, and a love so fierce it bent the architecture of magic itself. Lily Potter did not save her son with sentiment. She saved him with statute. She saved him by reading the old words, by understanding that the world is woven from laws deeper than legislation, by choosing to stand at the threshold and invoke the ancient covenant that binds guest and host, mercy and judgment, life and willing death. Voldemort fell, not because he was weak, but because he was arrogant, because he refused to see that thresholds have memory, that homes have will, that grace offered and refused within the bounds of a hearth can turn the very heavens against the one who scorns it. This is the truth that the ministry does not teach. This is the truth that sleeps in old stones and older blood. And should the Dark Lord ever rise again, the memory of that truth will rise with him quietly, inevitably, a law that cannot be unmade by any power in this world or the next. Let this story settle over you now like a blanket, warm and heavy. Let it carry you down into the deep, restful places where fear cannot follow, and where love made into Lost Anne's eternal watch. Sleep well, seeker. The hearth remembers, and it will guard you through the night.